Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce's Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. It's been a fantastic day, beautiful weather. We've had a barbecue, family have come, the family have gone, and now it's started to rain. So time to sit in front of the laptop with a cup of tea and you guys. So what should we talk about today? There's no better place to start than Beavers. That is to say that Mariupol has a I put myself off here has a circus that the Russians have provided, or the occupied authorities have provided, on behalf of the inhabitants there to keep them happy, take their minds off having to live in a destroyed city, as Chris Owicki says here, with few functioning public services. Russia has sent them a circus with a troupe of performing beavers. So let's just what a magnificent display of animal acrobatics. I mean, the crowd is enthralled. There are almost too many people to fit into the circus auditorium, and the beaver looks the most unimpressed beaver I have ever seen. There's a sentence I thought I'd never say. So anyway, that is what is going on in Mariupol. What can we say about that? Well, I have to say that Chris Owicki is pretty unimpressed. The typical Donetsk Telegram channel reports that Mariupol's first circus since the start of the war opened today, 10th of June, and is due to run until the 20th of August. It was opened by animal trainer Edgar Zapashny and the head of the Russian state circus, Sergei Belayakov. I mean, goodness me, circuses have gone a long way, haven't they? Oh dear. The Belayakov highlighted one of the circus's star acts, the world's only attraction with trained beavers. The beavers jump hurdles badly, swing on a trapeze, and descend a slide. Yes, I am going to show you a beaver on a trapeze, and why not? After all, it's Sunday. So here we have a beaver on a trapeze. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm pretty uncomfortable with this from an animal treating an animal. Whoa. I'm not 100% sure that beaver is enjoying that. Is it indeed? I hope that's not beaver urine. That's, oh, poor thing. No, it's not got that big a bladder, that's for sure. Anyway, and keeping them in those buckets, oh, that's pretty horrible. So, yeah, I don't quite know what to say elsewise. In the meantime, as a pro-Russian channel reports, apparently without irony, children are begging on the streets of Donetsk city, a sign of how bad poverty has become in the region. There are circuses, but apparently not much bread to go with them. Here we have video footage of a child begging in Donetsk city. So just, I don't know, that's a kind of representation of where Ukraine has come from and got to under the occupation, the liberation of Russia. Just, yeah. Spending the last couple of days in Odessa, says Oliver Carroll, I've been struck by the amount of Ukrainian now spoken there. Before, and I was speaking to Tim White the other day in my live chat. Go and check that out on the live tab. I spoke to Anastasia Praskova previously on a live interview. That's on my other channel. And both people have said that the amount of Ukrainian being spoken has increased, proportionally speaking. He said before, and I mean a year ago, it was exceptional that Ukrainian was spoken in Odessa. Now I think it's 50-50. That's what lobbing hundreds of missiles over does, I guess. Based on the above, on conversations in public places, I think it's still mostly Russian in homes. I wrote on what was only the start of a trend last year. So again, another sort of representation there of how things have moved this time within Ukraine, as in within the non-occupied territories of Ukraine. Right, another Chris Owicki thread. He does so many, and they're all so interesting. Russia's still ongoing mobilization effort is steadily widening in scope. With casualties in Ukraine mounting, the Russian government, parliament, and courts are removing an increasing number of exemptions. This will enable more and more men to be mobilized. I mean, essentially what Russia is doing, what it's having to do is mobilize without properly mobilizing. They did a full national mobilization saying all men between this age and this age need to go to here unless you've got this exemption and that exemption. Everyone needs to be mobilized. They're not doing that for reasons of public PR disaster. So they are doing everything they can to get people into the army without doing that, changing conscription laws, doing this, doing that, handing out mobilization decrees on the quiet. There's this kind of crypto mobilization, as I think it's been called. In the past month alone, the We Can Explain MO Telegram channel points out State Duma members, quote, have passed a number of bills that suggest the government plans to mobilize as many people as possible. These include removal of exemptions, even for those who are sick, disabled, and those who are 65 years old, permitting the Russian army to recruit even those convicted of serious crimes, removing exemptions for scientists and people with degrees. A Russian Supreme Court ruling has also banned those eligible for mobilization from traveling abroad. MO suggests that these may be signs of a forthcoming second wave of mobilization. However, it's equally, if not more likely, that the Russian government is simply pursuing a stealth mobilization, this kind of crypto mobilization strategy, in which the existing mobilization continues but gets steadily broader in scope, gathering up men who would previously have been exempted. What they don't want is the public recognition that there's a national mobilization, but they want the same functional outcome as there being one. So they need to do it in all but name, and that's, it appears, is exactly what is taking place. And it's no surprise at all, of course. Now, I love this video. I'm showing you this because, I don't know, two things, I guess. One, Ukraine still wins the beard war. There are many ways that this war is waging, many ways we can compare the metrics, the loss of troops, the loss of equipment, the territory gained or lost. And I think one of the most important ones is, awesome beardness. And Ukraine are winning the awesome beardness hands down. I mean, Chechens are trying to do a little bit, but on the battlefront, I think there's only one winner. But also, it appears that you don't have to pass a bleep test to get into the Ukrainian armed forces, or certainly not artillery crews. I mean, this is quite an interesting motley crew of artillerymen. Just here we go. I don't think he's even wearing body armor. Hey ho. And bang. So, I just thought I'd show you something different. Right, what I'm going to do now is show you a snippet that I recorded the other day, looking at a piece in Ukraine the Latest, and it concerns the views of Russians who are, many of them are exiled, who are readers of the Medusa independent Russian media outlet, and you would expect them to be kind of anti-war, anti-Putin, and some of them are, but they still have very nuanced opinions of the war itself. So we'll cut to that now. This is Ukraine the Latest. Francis Durnley here talking about Russians, often who are exiled Russians. And you might think, oh, they'll be anti-war, but actually there's some really nuanced opinions here, and opinions that might be quite surprising to you. So anyway, over to Francis Durnley.
But in terms of my final thought, I mentioned earlier this really interesting piece in Medusa, or Medusa, as it would technically be, which is the Russian and English language independent news website. And they've published a fascinating article called "The Only Thing Worse Than War Is Losing One." And it's about how even some of their readers, and they are a sort of liberal news source who were forced to leave Russia because they were independently reporting, even some of their readers support the war in Ukraine from a Russian perspective. And they ask their readers to explain to them why. And their testimonies are absolutely fascinating and incredibly revealing on this fundamental question about what ordinary Russians think about this war. And some of the nuances, I think, are particularly interesting. For example, Andrei, a 35-year-old in Volgograd: "A war ends when one side wins. Russia's defeat will mean national humiliation, which we cannot allow. Therefore, we must win. We no longer have a choice. Ukraine isn't looking for peace. They're just asking asking for more weapons and shelling Russian cities. Too much blood has been spilled for us to just say, thanks everyone, time to go our separate ways. Alexei, 24 years old. I don't support the war, but I also don't want Russia to lose. If that happens, it will be worse for everybody, and there's no doubt the world we're used to will collapse, and an even greater darkness will come. The war was a mistake, but losing it is unacceptable. Pavel, 30 years old, from Germany. I'm angry at both sides of the conflict. I'm angry at Russia because it started a stupid, bloodthirsty war that leads to senseless killing every day. I'm angry at the countries that support Ukraine because they are not insisting on an immediate succession of hostilities or an end to the senseless killing. Instead, they're supplying the country with weapons, understanding all the while that it's only increasing the number of victims. Sergei, 38 years old. I don't support the war.
There are so many. I mean, if I was to sit down with each of these people, I'd pick apart their arguments completely. It's like, I'm against the war, but if you're providing weapons for them, then it's just making the war longer and more people are going to die. So you're against the war, but people should just sit by and watch an aggressor just do what they like. So we shouldn't help them. So again, it goes back to the old analogy of, you see an old granny getting beaten up across a road. It's like, well, that's her problem. I'm against the fact that there's some young lad, beating her to a pulp, but if I go over and help, that would just prolong this tussle, and there'd be involvement and more people would get hurt. So I just let her get beaten up, and that's the right thing to do. No, if I'm against that, as a member of this society and having a social contract here, if you like, I'm morally obligated to get myself involved. Otherwise, my moral abstention is actually moral badness. I am effectively condoning that. So you can't say I disagree with the war and then don't do anything about it, because you're saying I disagree with the war, but I agree with the war. Really, like from a moral calculation point of view, I would argue. And so a lot of these ideas I completely disagree with, but that doesn't mean they're not happening, right? These may be wrong ideas, and I think they all are, but the fact that many exiled people have these ideas, and that many people who are against the war are still effectively for Russia winning is a real challenge going forward. Anyway, sorry to have interrupted.
But unfortunately, the very existence of my home, Russia, is at stake. I don't want to see the collapse, the destruction of my country. Another anonymous person. The only thing worse than a war is a lost war. Starting it was an insane mistake, but now we have to win it. Otherwise, we'll be in the position of being at the mercy of the conqueror. I don't support Putin. Damn him.
It's like, just parts of that you can agree with, and then parts of that it's like me and my mate. Well, my mate started beating up this old granny across the road, and I'm with him. I don't agree with what he's doing, but now he started doing it, I might as well pile in, because actually, if we don't continue beating this woman up to a pulp and kill her, then she'll go and get the police involved, and we'll be in jail, and we'll be in trouble. So we might as well just go all in then. That's how I'd analogize that. Analogies always have weaknesses, right? But just no. This is a power of identity. The power of, I've got to a point in my life, philosophically speaking, where I have become less and less nationalistic, right? So I'm not a flag waving, Brit. I don't get the Union flag and walk around and go, yeah. When things like the Jubilee came along, I'm a bit like, I'll have a cup of tea and whatnot, but because I philosophically think about monarchy and all stuff like that, and whether it's tenable, justifiable, rationally speaking, and all that, and I go through all these sort of arguments. In the end, I've missed the party because I've been arguing myself all day, or whatever. But actually, no. As I've grown older, I've become less nationalistic. The most nationalistic I am is watching rugby on TV and watching England, because I used to play as well. My body just contorts every time there's a tackle, and I'm shouting at the TV, and I get closer and closer, and it's like I'm properly into it. But actually, I let myself become have that kind of fervor then. But I just recognize that borders are arbitrary, and they're an accident of history and geography. We're all human beings, uh, and I didn't decide where I was born. I didn't merit being born there. I didn't merit being born to my family. It's understanding that it's just a complete accident that I am who I am in terms of, you know, before I was born, if you like. Um, and therefore, when you start understanding things like that, it's like, well, and I do love a lot of the stuff the UK stands for, and that's what gets me. Like, I love the UK for functionally what it is, for morally what it is, or what it can be, or what it has been, but isn't always. But I'm also fine with criticizing the heck out of it when it sucks, right? And it sucks a lot, but it just sucks. I mean, every country sucks a lot. Some countries suck less than others, and the UK on a global scale, right at the moment, is all right. Yeah. So I will herald the good stuff, but not be afraid to criticize the bad stuff. Whereas here, these people are like, I can't criticize the bad stuff. I can't have Russia failing. Whereas I'd be like, man, I live in a place that sucks, and the quicker it fails, the better, and then we can start again and make it good. That's just two different worldviews. I'm fine with change and reconstructing and making things better, progress. I guess that's the progressive nature of me. Whereas other people are like, oh no, we can't, even though it sucks, like what we're doing sucks, we can't have that crumble. Like, it's better to do something wrong and maintain this idea of what my country is, which then somehow supports my own identity. These two are integrated in some way, and so the destruction of my country is a destruction of me. Whereas I just separate those two things. Like, my country destroys, I'm still me, and I believe what I believe, and I've got good rational basis for believing what I believe. Because heck, if I didn't, then what the hell am I? What the hell have I been doing for the last 15 years in philosophy? So I'm happy with what I believe, um, and if my country's bad and it disintegrates, then that is good, and we can rebuild to something better.
Dmitry, Moscow, 35. At first, I consistently opposed the war, but over time I got tired of what was happening, of the constant fear for myself and my friends, of the fact that I could be called up to the front if I opposed the war, and of the foreign media writing that Russians need to do something about the current regime and the war. I also realised that if Russia doesn't find a way to get out of this situation without losing face or losing on the global stage, life in Russia will get drastically worse. There are a number of examples in world history that indicate this, such as Germany. And I go on. I mean, it's really, I think the most striking thing about this is that you've got people who are opposed to Putin but still believe that Russia needs to win for some of the reasons that are articulated here. Just a couple more, if I may, David. Sergei, 27 years old. I support the actions of my president and my country. Yes, I didn't initially understand the purpose of the operation, but after some time, I saw what I felt were Russophobic statements from both the European Union and the US. Anyone with critical thinking skills and a modicum of intelligence understands Russia cannot be a terrorist state. We're just protecting our interests and our sovereignty. So I, like the majority of Russian citizens, fully support the operation, and if it becomes necessary for me to fight in it, so be it. And then the last one, which tallies to that previous one, is he says, it's Mudrad in Moscow. If we don't have the Black Sea Fleet in Crimea, we'll lose influence over the Black Sea and the Caucasus. All Ukrainian governments explicitly state that they'll get Crimea and our eastern territories back by force or by diplomacy. That's a direct threat to us. And I think that's the other really striking thing that comes out of these testimonies, is this idea that if Russia doesn't get what it feels is its right, that it will lose face and that this will have huge consequences internally. And it's just fascinating in terms of some of the nuances, as I say, that are in these testimonies, as well as some of the sort of surprising things that they're willing to say, despite being from a more, as I say, liberal perspective. So a concerning read, David, but I think an important one.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, the idea that my state, well, this is, again, I'm close to going down a psychological route again here with cognitive dissonance reduction. But Sergei saying Russia is not a terrorist state. Like anyone with critical thinking skills and a modicum of intelligence understands Russia is not a terrorist state. That's just a mere assertion there. You can't say that. Like, I'm using my critical thinking skills and I have a modicum of intelligence, I hope. And I understand that Russia is a terrorist state. I mean, we can both play the assertion game, except I can give you some really good evidence to suggest that it is a terrorist state. And in fact, that means the conclusion that it is a terrorist state would, I would argue, be rationally held. And so I would be using, like, it's just, this, this is someone, again, who is probably going through cognitive dissonance. So the idea is core belief is that Russia's great. And why is it great? Because I am Russian. So the idea of integration of my identity and my country. So that if someone, and we all do this, right? If someone, I know this from my threads. If I do anything that insults the US, right, I get a lot of people that go, "Rah," because I've insulted their country and their country is them. And there's that integration of their identity in their country. If I insult Tucker Carlson or Elon Musk, if people like those people, I did a presentation on this some months back where I showed you, I even drew some stuff, I think, but like how if that idea is within, so the idea of Elon Musk or the idea of Tucker Carlson is in what you like, right? Then that becomes part of your identity. So if I slag off Elon Musk, I get a lot of people on my threads going, You're a douchebag, you know what you're talking about," because I've dared to insult someone who they like, and because they like them, that it's almost, well, it isn't almost, it is as if I am insulting them personally, right? And so we need to check our reactions to things to wonder whether this is a knee-jerk psychological reaction because someone's insulted something that I like, and go, okay, let's just try and distance myself from that, and let's evaluate their criticism. Or does their criticism hold up? And if it holds up, I need to reevaluate why I like this person. Or I need to be more nuanced, which is I like them in this respect, but in that respect, they've said some stuff that sucks. And actually, although we don't like, see, the problem is psychologically, humans don't like uncertainty, and we really favour like black and white analyses of stuff. So that kind of nuanced grey, it doesn't sit well with humans. We're not too good at that. But actually, that's really what we need to do, which is to say he sucks there, but he's good there, and that he's just is a complex human being. And here it's like, I love Russia because I am Russian. It's just simply that it's a one-to-one kind of correlation there. Okay, Russia is me, I is Russia. So if then someone says that Russia is a terrorist state, that's basically saying that I am a terrorist state, or I like, because I like Russia, because I am Russian, then I like terrorist states. Okay, that creates cognitive dissonance, and that needs to be reduced, right? So I need to somehow do something with that data. And the data is Russia is not a terrorist state. So I completely just deny that as one way of dealing with cognitive dissonance, that disharmony in your brain with two competing narratives or a core belief and evidence against a core belief, is to bury your head in the sand, or sometimes shoot the messenger. So, if someone says, "Oh, if you like a particular person," and I come along and say, "Oh, I don't like that person because of X, Y, and Z," then you have a go at me personally and say, "Oh, my conclusions can't be good because I'm this kind of person or that kind of person." So you attack me personally, and that then allows you to let go of the criticisms I was bringing to the table. So that all these techniques that take place that allow one of these things, and it's almost always the evidence against your core belief, to either dissipate, evaporate, disappear, or be adapted so that it fits with your core belief. And that's exactly what's happening here. Okay, so that I think is fascinating, somewhat problematic going forward. Right, and now back to me today, and not me the other day. Now we're going to move on to talking about the dam again. Sorry to do this repeatedly, but actually I need to let you know of my refined conclusion. I talked about these different jars and putting a jelly bean into each jar for the different theories, of different hypotheses of what could happen. That the Ukrainians did it, that it was a cascading set of events as a result of incorrectly maintaining the dam. And then the Russians did it maliciously. And I put my jelly beans in and said, look, Russians did it maliciously, overwhelmingly has more of the data points in there, has some of the larger data points. So not only more jelly beans, but some of the bigger jelly beans. And so you look at those 3 jars, and the Ukrainians did it, has basically no jelly beans in. Maybe you could think about putting 1 in there, but overwhelmingly it's not the case that is the most rational conclusion to hold to. So we should dismiss that. But I said, look, given new evidence, new data, I would be open to changing my mind, of course, and that is, what we should all do. It should be evidence-based conclusions. But I was making reference to Ryan Beth's video yesterday, where he talked about cascading set of variables leading to the dam falling apart, and although I answered some of the points with reference to a thread here by a guy called Vladimir Desenko, I hadn't watched the video, and actually I've watched it now, and it is a really good video. I'd advise everyone go and watch it. And now I think I sent to a conclusion that's kind of a hybrid conclusion. So I don't know how much it would go over old ground again. The hybrid conclusion would be something like this. So far, the information is pointing to an explosion. All the overwhelming evidence for the Russians did it had something to do with it, rather than it just being the dam falling apart, is that the Russians said they mined it. We've got written evidence of that back in October last year. There's video evidence of them admitting to mining it, and that they had initially planned to set the explosions off on the January the 1st. And then we have got intercepted calls, I think several of them now, admitting that they've done it. I mean, it doesn't get sort of much better than that, than them setting it up and saying they're going to do it, and then saying after it happened that they did do it. Right, so I think that's really important. We can't just dismiss that evidence and just say, oh, it's just cascading issues to do with the maintenance of the dam. And then you have as well all the advantages they get out of it, all that kind of evidence, circumstantial evidence. That's the word I was looking for. And then the claims that there was seismic data, Norwegian seismic data, but actually it wasn't a station in Norway. It was closer. I forget the name of the place. It's in Romania, I think. And also satellite data to suggest there was an explosion just before the dam collapsed. And if that's the case, then it would appear that there was some kind of detonation that caused the dam to collapse. But as I say, I've got this hybrid conclusion now, hybrid hypothesis, that says something like this. So far there is information pointing to an explosion, but there's also information showing that the dam was in poor shape to begin with. If I was to put a bet on it, I think there's a good chance that Russia went to blow up the power generators, and their negligence in maintaining the dam meant that it collapsed with the blast that they thought the dam could handle. This also explains why it happened at the cost of their own positions and equipment downriver. So we've also heard in intercepted calls that it was much worse than they were expecting, and so on and so forth. Lots of ideas about this again listed in that discussion. So we're going to make a little bit of reference to this guy Vladimir Desenko, but I'm going to basically go to Ryan Macbeth and someone in one of my threads who's laid out a really good case for what he thinks happened. So just to remind you, you've got the dam here, and this area is under Russian control. And there are these 2 blue gantry cranes that basically go along a railway road, and you have these different sluice gates that are separated by these pillars, these structures, and so therefore it's not one monolithic thing. So if you've got a weakness over here, it shouldn't affect the dam over there. That's one of the arguments, that it wasn't just maintenance issues or general issues due to weakness because there were some explosions last year over this end of the dam. That's unlikely to cause issues over here where it eventually fell out, perhaps where the explosions took place. Now, there is an argument to say that either these gantry cranes aren't operational, or the Russians just weren't using them. They didn't want to put them over to this end of the dam because it's closer to being having snipers shoot at them, and so they only opened this sluice gate. But it could be, as we're going to find out, that maybe that was the only sluice gate they could open because they weren't repairing the dam. And then we get into this argument as to whether they blew it up on purpose, and or whether it was under such poor repair and they didn't fix it, which is their moral culpability for that. If you're in charge of a big infrastructural project like this, or a nuclear power plant, and you're not looking after it, and it goes wrong, then hey, that's on your watch. So either way, this is Russian responsibility, but I guess it's slightly more morally problematic if they do it fully on purpose, right? So what this chap Stefan says, hi Jonathan, I need to expand on the dam destruction part because I feel pretty much everybody gets it partly wrong. For example, I think that both gradual deterioration and explosions contributed to the overall disaster. This is going to be a long, so bear with me. I'm going to go through the arguments and hypotheses in much the same spirit as you are. One, the sluice gates and the hypothesis of cascading destruction. I would argue that there can be cascading destruction of the sluice gates if there is a breach of the dam already and the flowing water undermines a concrete support structure. It depends on how deep the concrete structure goes and whether the strong current from a breach can wash out the foundation. It would need an expert who's more familiar with the construction of this dam to tell if that's possible. You are correct, however, that the damage to the upper structure, for example, the road or the railway going across the dam, is not going to impact the structural integrity of the sluice gates. The road is made of independent segments, each of which rests on the concrete supports on either side. The concrete supports are the elongated pillars or walls between the actual gates. Those pillars are resting on a foundation deep under the water level, and whether the road is there or not doesn't matter. Similarly, the railway will also be constructed of segments that sit on the top. In between the road and the railway, there is a rail on which the blue gantry cranes move, and this will also be in the shape of the segments resting on top. In other words, what it's trying to say here is that with the kind of HIMARS hits or artillery hits or whatever, or the Russians blowing up parts of the top of this dam over time, that's not going to affect the structural integrity of the dam. So the Russians presently claiming that, hey, it's been hit by HIMARS, it ain't going to do squat to the dam. So when the Russians blew up the top of the three northernmost sluice gates last autumn to protect their retreat to the left river bank, they only destroyed rail and road segments with no bearing on the structural integrity of the dam. Hence, there was no cascading damage starting from there. This is where Desenko is correct. So this guy is saying there's no cascading set of events that goes from the explosion that the Russians did of the dam over here in October last year, which is one of the theories. So he's saying that cascading set of events is not it. But actually, that's not what Ryan Macbeth says, who basically one of the major points is this.
Russia would never have to lower the water level to put explosives on the dam. They already have access to the plant's greatest weak point, the powerhouse. This is where the pipes come in, and don't forget that explosives work better when they are confined. Place explosives in the powerhouse, and the river will do the rest of the work. But I'm not sure this is the result of explosives. If we move forward to June 1st, we see that again, that right spillway has turbulent water. Now, I don't have a picture of every single day between March 3rd and June 1st. I just don't have the money to buy all that footage. But I want to show you what happens on June 2nd. The road bridge is gone. Now, there is a phenomenon called hydrodynamic scour. Essentially, fast-flowing water will dig out a hole in front of an obstruction. So, at this point, I'm kind of wondering if constantly running that southernmost spillway created a scour hole that collapsed the roadway and kept moving back and back and back toward the dam, undermining the dam. Also note that turbulent water is all over the dam. This is overtopping. This dam is overtopping. It's doing something that no dam should be doing. So now there might be a scour hole forming below the dam and the force of water overtopping the dam above. By June 6th, the dam breaks, and it appears to have broken right where that scour hole may have formed. And here's what remains of the powerhouse.
So he's one to say that it appears to be lack of maintenance on the Russians' part that did it. Okay, to continue with Stefan. However, it's worth mentioning that sluice gates need the gantry cranes for operation. The sluice gate is a rectangular metal wall that is supported by concrete pillars on either side. It can be raised and lowered with the help of one or two cranes. It's in its bottom position. It blocks the water flow unless the water rises so high that it overflows the top. When raising it, a gap opens at the bottom that lets water through, and you can control the amount of water flowing through per hour by how much you raise the gate. Now, it should be clear that since last autumn, the northernmost three sluice gates were inoperable because the rail for the cranes was gone there, and it was impossible to position a crane above them. The gates remained in the position they had at the time of the blast, which appears to be the closed position. In fact, I have some doubts as to whether the cranes were operable at all since then. All the pictures I've seen since then have the gantry cranes in the same position. It is unclear whether this is due to some damage or whether the Russians simply didn't care and left the dam in the configuration it had before. Maybe they didn't know how to do it, but you'd assume that there was ample time to bring somebody in who had a clue. I would greatly appreciate to see more pictures of the dam since last autumn, which can help clear up the question whether the cranes were operable and the sluice gates could still be moved. If you lose the ability to move 3 of the sluice gates, that would be of very little consequence. But if you lose the ability to move all of them, it's a lot more serious. How do you regulate the water level of the reservoir then? I only see the possibility to use the generators or the turbines to control the flow of water, provided they still work. But does that suffice? If you look at the diagram showing the reservoir level over time, this is super important here. So this, when the dam burst, it was at record high levels, so that you had that overtopping. That this part of the graph is what you'd expect if they were unable to open the sluice gates or could only open one sluice gate. It would just get fuller and fuller and fuller during the rainy kind of spring periods and the thawing from the winter melt. So so he says, it becomes apparent that since last October, the level seems to have gotten out of control. First, it went down to 2 meters below normal, and then at the end of the winter, when the snow was melting, it started to rise until it reached a point of overflow in May. This is what you would expect when nothing is being done, i.e. when nobody does anything to the sluice gate configuration. In autumn, it would have been necessary to close the sluice gates that were open, which seem to have been the ones nearest to the generator building. Then, towards the end of April, it would have been necessary to open more of them to prevent the level from rising above normal. It doesn't appear as if any of that had been done. In fact, it isn't even clear if the generators were used to regulate the level. Question is, have the Russians been negligent, incompetent, or malicious here? Have they been prevented by damage to the cranes? And if so, what did they do to repair them? So it's still talking here about their moral culpability. To be clear, it is their responsibility in any case. They blew up the first 3 road and rail segments at the northern end, so if they were hampered by damage, it was their own self-inflicted damage. At any rate, they were in control of the dam, so they were obliged to repair any damage that prevented them from operating it responsibly. There are some voices blaming the Ukrainians for shelling the dam or hitting it with HIMARS. I see no reason to suspect that this had any impact on the integrity of the sluice gates, which I totally agree. There are images showing damage to the road segments, like torn railings and holes in the surface. Even if it would have caused the road segment to fall off, it wouldn't have affected the sluice gates or the dam itself. And then he goes on to say, right, deterioration at the beginning of June. With all this said about the sluice gates, there is evidence of some structural damage that was likely caused by gradual decay of the structure. When comparing images from June the 1st, and this is what Ryan Macbeth was talking about, with images from the following day, you see that the curved road segment next to the generator building fell off. If it had been just the road segments, it wouldn't have mattered, but it seems from the images that 2 pillars they were resting on were missing too. And this means that it wasn't the road segments that failed, it was their support underneath that gave way. This is quite serious because it means that there must have been structural damage to the concrete structure supporting the sluice gates next to the generator building. Those pillars only gave way when they were washed out, which needs either an amount of water flow that exceeds the construction limit or water that manages to hollow out their foundations. On June the 2nd, it must have dawned on the Russian operators of the dam that they had a serious problem and they needed to do something about it. What could have caused this? Remember that the sluice gates were open all the time since last autumn. The other sluice gates were closed all the time, so there's only one sluice gate that was open. This means that most of the water that passed the dam went through maybe 3 to 5 sluice gates adjacent to the generator building. So maybe not just one then. Sometime in May, the water level had risen to the point of overflow. So from there on, water also went over the top of the other sluice gates. But at the same time, there was maximum water flow through the open sluice gate. Hence, maximum wear more than what was the normal range. Now, if the cranes had been operational, the simple remedy would have been to open more sluice gates and preferably also close the ones near the generator building to stop further erosion. But as explained above, it seems that the Russians were unable to do that. I imagine that at that point, they were rather desperately looking for other ways to get the water level down, because it must have been clear to them that if things carried on this way, the dam would soon give way right next to the generator building, i.e. the pillars would eventually collapse entirely and get washed away. The breach would have been much narrower, maybe 3 to 5 sluice gates wide, but it would likely have cascaded on from there, depending on the strength of the remaining pillars. So, what the Russians did about it. So, in a situation like this, it would have been mandatory for the Russians to immediately warn the inhabitants downstream that that the structural integrity of the dam had been compromised, and that some emergency measures would have to be taken, even if it was unclear what they would be. But this is war, and the Russians had been irresponsible before, so you'd expect some amateur action. What exactly they did remains unclear. It does seem clear that explosives were involved from seismic measurements as well as satellite measurements, and there is at least one alleged witness recording that suggests that the Russians did something that ended up much bigger than they expected. There are also some claims of witnesses hearing explosions, but there are also other claims to say actually there weren't many witnesses that did hear explosions. So there's conflicting evidence there. Maybe they tried to relieve the dam by wanting to blow open more sluice gates, but instead of opening them, they destroyed them. The Italian job, 1969, springs to mind. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off, says Michael Kay. It is also possible, of course, that they used the opportunity to deliberately inconvenience the people downstream, particularly the Ukrainian troops. Maybe a combination of all of that. There is strong evidence, however, that they blew up the middle section of the generator building, which is what I discuss next. So, blowing up the generator building. When looking at the drone video taken before sunrise on the morning of the destruction, which must have been about 2 hours after the dam collapse and the explosion, I find it remarkable that the generator building seems split in two, with the part in the middle missing. So let's go and see if we can find that. So I presume he means this kind of footage. There's several like this. And you can see that this building part here. There's maybe that section there, then there's a missing part in the middle, and then the rest of it over there. I presume that's what he is meaning. So let's go back to what he says. Generator building seemed to consist, so the middle part missing, of the entrance section to the south end, followed by 3 sections with 2 generators each. The sections were built in a way that allowed them to separate from each other, i.e. they were structurally independent. Now, on this drone video, you see that the entrance section and the first generator section are still largely intact and sit where they should be. The next generator section is gone and water flows through the gap. The last generator section is still there, badly damaged, and has been dislodged somewhat. Also, the whole territory south of the generator building up to the lock seems unaffected. How can this be explained? It certainly was not the result of cascading damage from the north, because that would have affected the last section of the generator building first. There wouldn't have been a gap where the middle section used to be. So I think this is quite a good point here, that if there's this cascading stuff, when you get to the generator buildings, this would be the first section to go, arguably, rather than this section there. But then it depends on the scouring that's going underneath, I guess. So the conclusion is that the middle section was blown up. The fact that no sign of such a blast was visible on the adjacent sections tells me that it must have been blown up from the inside. It is well known that Russians had mined the power plant and the dam last year already. I don't know where exactly the charges were located and how strong they were. It is also unclear to me what the Russians wanted to achieve with the destruction of the middle segment of the generator building. I don't even know if it was deliberate or somehow accidental. If it was deliberate, I can only guess that they were desperate enough to try to avoid total destruction of the dam by partial destruction of the generator building, figuring that if they blew the middle section off, thereby creating a path for the water big enough to lower the reservoir level to a point where the rest of the dam could survive, so that the segments of the building left standing either side of the gap would effectively prevent cascading destruction of the rest of the structure. Obviously, this failed. The northernmost segment of the generator building was also badly damaged, so that it couldn't stem the flow of water and got dislodged. The sequence of failures is unclear, so I don't know if blowing up the generator building came first and then the sluice gates failed, or if it was the other way around. Maybe this comes to light someday. So further erosion. Once the dam had collapsed, the water current would of course erode the structure further. I find it particularly interesting what happened between the generator building and a lock on the south side of the dam. Initially, as is evident from the mentioned drone video, this area was unaffected, but by now it has all been washed away, even though the remainders of the generator building still stand. How could that happen? One has to remember that most of the territory downstream of the dam and the lock is lower than the water level of the reservoir. Therefore, once enough water has passed through the breach and the water level raises downstream, this territory will be overflown and submerged. Perhaps this already leads to enough erosion that causes the entire soil to get washed away and a new pathway for the water to form. But I would need more images to be able to tell what happened there. Conclusion and blame. I find it plausible that the Russians didn't intend and expect the outcome they produced. Their intentions and thought process that led to this outcome are unclear, but they were, of course, responsible for the dam and what they've done to it. The Ukrainians have no influence that I can see. The disaster is the work of the Russians. This doesn't mean that they were deliberately wanted to cause a humanitarian catastrophe. As I have explained, it may well be that their neglect over the last months led to the situation that compelled them to drastic measures that ended up making things worse, much worse. It spiraled out of their control. Such a catastrophe often isn't a result of a single mistake. Much more frequently, it is neglect and or incompetence that went on unchecked for some considerable time until problems pile up in a way that overtaxes the abilities of those responsible and things spiral out of control. Corruption and communication problems often play their part. Higher ranks bugger off and leave the lower ranks with a problem they are unable to solve. Blame is being shifted around. I hope this lengthy deliberation was of use to you. Some of you, tell me what you think, where you think I'm wrong, and fill in any information I may have missed or misinterpreted. So the end result is his theory is that the dam was blown. Possibly I think his main thesis would be that it was blown as a way of solving the problems of the poor maintenance. Although he says it's unclear. So it could be that they just decided to blow it for tactical military reasons, or whatever, and the outcome was the same. So whether they're blowing it to solve their ineptitude, or whether they are blowing it to cause issues for the Ukrainians, is kind of neither here nor there. They blew that part of the dam, which then was massively exacerbated by the weakness of the dam from their own lack of maintenance. And there you have it. So that's like a more nuanced approach. I'm somewhere around those areas, those three areas myself. I know I'm happy to be persuaded either way, but still, the Russians are at least very culpable, and perhaps morally abhorrently culpable, if indeed that there was that malicious intent thrown in as well. Anyway, that's enough damn conversation for the next month, certainly with regards to who was responsible. And now let's look at some animal footage to remind us of happier times. Actually, no, this is still heartbreaking, but we have a cat being saved by a dog, so it's lovely. And I think the cat is sitting on the dog's face as it's just about swimming to safety. I'm having to mute it because the music is ridiculous. I've just cut out the bit where I played it with music and got angry. So here we have a cat, a little kitten, sitting on a dog's face as it paddles to safety, and that's absolutely fantastic. Paddles to a boat, and that kitten is saved. So that's nice to see, isn't it? And let's see some more animal joy here. So let's give you the story behind this. The border guard met his dog after the defense of Azovstal and long months of captivity. So the border guard was captured and been released from captivity, and this is a dog. The dog Ramus was in the occupation last year, so the return of the dog turned into a whole special operation itself. We cannot reveal its details yet, but the main thing is that the friends are now together. So I don't quite know what the story is here, whether the dog was in sort of captivity or in occupied territories and couldn't be, had to be kind of extricated from or extracted from occupied territory, and this guy was himself captive and then released in a prison exchange, I assume. Anyway, this is absolutely lush. Fortunately, I can't play it with the music, the emotional music, but ears are up, senses something, and then bam, recognition hits, and they're loving it. Complete, unadulterated loyalty and unconditional love from the dog there as the two are reunited. Love that. Yeah, nothing like watching stuff like this on loop. But yeah, anyway, there you go. Really appreciate all of your support. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Hit the bell button, all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for all of your support. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.